Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Terry Cole Show. I have such a treat for you today. I'm interviewing a new friend. His name is Nate Postlethwait, and you might know him. That is his actual name on Instagram, Nate_Postlethwait. And he is a writer, a survivor, an inner child work advocate. And he's basically, through his work, he's sharing about his own healing from childhood sexual abuse from the age of 5 to the age of 14. And he was also put through conversion therapy, which is where it's a religious therapy that believes that you can make someone ungay, which of course is not possible, which is just more abuse on top of the abuse. But he has come out on the other side and has become such an advocate for inner child work in particularly. Um, and I just love his work. I love what he's doing out there in the world. I know that he has a course starting on August 1st. So I just wanted him to come on the show and talk about his entire journey to healing, to give hope to anyone who has been through this or who has a trauma background, feels broken, feels like you can't get fixed. Here's the thing, you can heal. So I hope that you enjoy this interview with Nate as much as I enjoyed interviewing him. Nate, welcome to the Terry Cole Show.
Thanks so much, Terry. I'm glad to be here.
I'm super, super psyched to have you. I found you. I was telling these guys at the top that I think I really just found you through social media, which is so interesting that everything that a lot of what you put out, I'm like, oh, that's so good. And noticed, and I was like, in my saved collection, I was like, who is this guy? Like, why do I have like 15 things saved from some dude I never heard of? And that was you. And
Love it.
so then I approached you, and I invited you to do something, and you were already engaged on that evening. But I'm so psyched to have you here now. So, if you don't mind, I would love to start with your story, basically, and feel free to like actually tell it. What brought you to do this inner child healing trauma work in your life?
Sure. Gosh, where do I start? I grew up in the deep South, very religious family, youngest of 7 kids, and a lot of restrictions in understanding who I was as a kid, very empathic, sensitive. I would come home from church after hearing the prayer request in Sunday school, and just truly for a day it would sit with me, and I would tell my siblings and my parents of just, aren't you concerned about this? Like, do you understand the impacts of this? And so just this really tenderhearted kid who happened to be born in an environment where that just was not something that was going to be beneficial. I started experiencing childhood sexual assault when I was 5. And I was born into this family and generation where there was just a lot of prior trauma that had never been addressed. And so it was just part of my childhood where that abuse was paired with a lot of emotional and mental abuse. And the sexual pieces went on from 5 until I was about 14 with different people in and out of our home, and different abusers. And so you have this type of foundation as a kid. And I have coached a lot of people, and I've done so much work with others on inner child work. And a lot of people, I think, have this awareness as kids that that's not how things were supposed to be. I never had that awareness. There was never a moment where I thought this was not my fault. And I don't know if that was the highly sensitive piece or the empath piece, or the fact that there was just so much abuse, so much trauma so young that my nervous system was just in hypervigilant mode and survival mode. And there just wasn't room to process anything other than survival. And maybe that's why I never thought that. But I was
Right.
primed, just really primed for a lot of bad therapy and a rough road ahead of me of trying to make sense of all of this trauma as a kid. The two big breaking points for me, the two big discovery pieces, were in my early 30s. When I was 31 years old, I had a nervous breakdown. And
Mm.
at the time, I had kind of reached the peak of my career, and things were going really well. But there was just this moment of my brain went one way and my body went the other, and just said, we are not going to cooperate. And I locked myself in my home and stopped living for about 10 months. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD at that time. And I had been in therapy for 13 years during that. I had been in religious therapy. And I can't say enough about how inappropriate it was and how ineffective it was. It just, people use that statement, time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't.
Definitely not trauma. I'm with you, Nate.
Yeah.
No, it does not.
Time impacts trauma, and trauma bleeds in other parts of your lives in ways that you just don't recognize. And so for 13 years, I use this term often, we were applying Band-Aids on bullet wounds. And finally, after all of that therapy, I just got to a place where I couldn't function anymore. And another big piece of my story is I was in conversion therapy. I knew in the Christian culture, especially, there's this idea that people become gay by being sexually abused, and it's so harmful. And what that does is from 18 to 31, we were addressing this piece of me that I was told I needed to repent of and work through, and never addressing the actual abuse and never addressing the trauma. And
Unbelievable.
yeah, there's 700,000 of us, by the way, who have gone through conversion therapy and the camps and the conferences, and just a lot. I still don't quite have words for the grief and anger that I have over not ever being able to get those years back, and knowing that the only reason I was a part of that system was because of vulnerability and pain. It wasn't because of conscious behavior. It wasn't because I was making a decision that made sense. So again, I think the compounds of conversion therapy, and then at 31, you've got this human being who has never really done much work around being human, had never heard anything about the nervous system, didn't know anything about brain function, had never said the word trauma, had never really identified, hey, all of that stuff that happened to you as a kid, trauma. There was none of that. There was this really lame approach for 13 years of, if you can fix this thing about your sexuality, then all of a sudden God's going to do this and this switch is going to come on. And gosh, I lost all those years investing in something, and the trauma, of course, was being impacted and spreading into other parts of my life.
Being re-traumatized, newly traumatized on top of the old trauma.
Absolutely.
Because again, it's the person who you're trusting, whether they're guided or misguided, who the hell cares? Like, at the end is that it's still put on you. Like, if you could just do this part right, then you will be ungay. And it's like, no, that is not how it works. So, wow, I'm so sorry. You went through that. I know that this is part of your story, but it's so painful to hear about a therapist, quote unquote. You're like, wow, just do no harm. Hi, did you not read that part of what you're supposed to do, therapist? Anyway, I interrupted you. Please continue.
No, thank you for that feedback. It really is. I talk about this often on social media, that I can speak very effectively about the impacts of sexual abuse, child abuse, neglect, abandonment. I spent time in foster care. I can speak so effectively about those things. When the conversation switches to religious trauma or spiritual abuse or conversion therapy, my body heats up. Like, it's still stored in me, where I still have some of that to process, because as I've done inner child work, I get to this younger version of myself in my 20s. And there are certain times I'm so mad at him for being in that environment. And I have to constantly go back and say, what other option did he have? Right. He had no idea that what was going on around him was an absolute shit show. There was no way for him to identify. He did not have a single person that he could have called on outside of his faith system to say, let me give you some ideas about what's really going on. So It's tough. It's really tough to look back and want those years back somehow, to feel like your life is balanced and fulfilled, but also grieving and being able to say, I can't get that back, but I've got to honor what that younger version of myself went through, because any other avenue or path is just going to cause me more pain.
Yep. But it's hard. It is difficult. And yet you're doing so much to normalize this conversation. in the world. Like that's part of what I was so drawn to in your work, was how you're so articulate, specific, and truthful, and just resonates as truth, where we have to have these conversations and normalize these conversations, because this is how collectively we can start moving those layers of shame off of this conversation and off of people who have survived these experiences, because there is still so much shame that goes on. So I'm going to assume you got out of therapy with that person at that point, and then what happened? Tell us.
I checked myself into an outpatient center. I went to that therapist, and I'd seen that therapist for about 6 or 7 years. And I said, I found this place. They address, mental issues and these different things. I didn't know what to call any of the stuff that was going on inside of me. But things were really dark. In that 10 months, I was sleeping 2 hours a night. I was having constant flashbacks of being abused as a kid, and just in terrible shape. I sold my partnership, the part of the business that I owned, and just quit going to work. I accrued a lot of debt. I gained 50 pounds. I mean, I truly stopped functioning as a human, and did not know what to do. So I went to this therapist and I showed him this online brochure and just said, and when I showed it to him, he said, let me do some investigating and just, make sure that this is a good fit. And I said, I'm going here. I'm going to this program. And I did. And so for the first time in my life, outside of the religious realm, the person who my therapist handed me her card, and it had so many credentials after her name. And I look back on that and I think that's how unaware I was, that I didn't even know that my therapist wasn't even a licensed therapist. He had a degree in therapy, but he skipped becoming licensed because he wanted to have access to do really unethical and inappropriate things. So
Yep.
I didn't even know that world existed.
Wow.
I go to this outpatient center, and it was a lifeline like no other. We did such powerful inner work that I just had never been exposed to anything like that before. I always say that it kind of burst the balloon of pressure, where I felt like, okay, I am going to survive this. I don't know what my next steps are, but I am going to survive. And then shortly after that, I was diagnosed while I was there. Shortly after that is when I started EMDR therapy. And I decided, I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, had been there for 10 years. And I decided that I really need space from my old environment. So I moved, but I did fly back to do EMDR there because I had such a strong sense of community. I had a safe place to stay. So I did intensives of EMDR, like 6 to 8 hours a day, 3 to 4 days in a row.
Wow. Amazing.
I don't recommend that. That was just kind of like the time, but Terri, that kind of introduced me to trauma work. That was 10 years ago. And that was my introduction to, here's what's going on in your brain. Here's what's going on inside of your body. Here is how you connect to these different parts of yourself.
Amazing. And you guys, we'll put the output links for what Nate is talking about. I think many of you are familiar with EMDR. I literally had to look up exactly what, I mean, you know it because we all know it, but like I was like, what is it? Oh yeah, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And this is something that is incredibly effective for deep and early trauma, and also for people coming back from combat zones. And it's sort of amazing. So I'm actually really glad that you had a good experience with it. I agree with you, 6 to 8 hours a day. Wow, that's kind of a lot, but that's pretty intense. So you got to the point of moving, really getting on your healing path. And then what inspired you to sort of bring your consciousness and your experience? Like, what drew you to other survivors, or to want to, because I see you as someone who is really inspiring and leading and holding this incredible container for survivors, that you really have created, and I don't even know it's possible to do it, but you have an incredibly safe space for survivors. So what inspired you? Because now I know you have a course that's coming out where people are going to get your goodness if it's something that they need. So what inspired you to go this route?
I had kind of back-to-back episodes of it. Started when I was 39. I finally came out after years and years of EMDR and other trauma work. There was still this belief system that I had other work to do to figure out how do I change the sexuality piece. And I was finally healthy enough to recognize this is never going to change, and you need to figure this out. And so my coming out process was beautiful in the sense that it changed so many of my relationships, but most importantly, my relationship with myself. Also had a lot of grief involved, but I came out when I was 39. I turned 40 the next year. And that year I'd hit the peak of my career again. I'd been in real estate for 13 years, always high performer. I started my first full-time job when I was 14, and work and success has always been a mask that I've been able to hide quite a bit with. And so after I turned 40, about a month later, I just started looking at my life and thinking, but what else? This is not it. This is not the thing that you want to do with your life. And so it started with this idea of next year, I'm going to take a year off and I'm going to go travel. And that turned into, I'm going to give myself permission to start writing and just put a little bit of my story out there and see what happens. And that turned into, I'm selling everything that I own. And then that turned into, when I say goodbye, I have to make a commitment to not have a plan B when I return. And so that's how this whole thing started. I left 3 years ago to travel, and traveled, gosh, in 6 months, I went to 22 different destinations and did a lot of that by myself, and a lot of self-discovery, some pretty amazing experiences. I learned so much about myself. And when I started writing and sharing parts of my story, what I began to recognize is how much trauma I still had. And so I think that a lot of people's desire on social media, what I saw was that a lot of people have this desire to have a thing that no one else has, and this idea or this concept or something that's just a must have. And the more I approached it, the more I thought, I'm going to share what I know. I'm going to share the things that have been most beneficial for me as a survivor, not as an expert, but as someone who has had to walk this really dark path on my own. And so, yeah, I really consistently a year and a half ago, I started sharing like daily ideas and different things. And then it started growing so fast that I got overwhelmed. So I got off of social media for 4 months.
Did you really?
I did, because I kind of went back and forth with like, I don't know if I want this much impact. I can't stress enough, I'm in a position where I want to build really effective communities with a very clear vision. And I don't know if you get a lot of DMs, I'm sure you do, but those exhaust me to no end. So that was one of the things, was like learning how to turn my DMs off has helped a lot.
Yep.
But I think really honing the vision in on, if people want to be a part of this, I just want to speak on behalf of childhood trauma and speak very clearly about what it's been like to carry trauma for a long time that wasn't even named as trauma, how that shows up in my life now, and the price that I've paid for that. And I had no idea that the amount of people would resonate and share their stories in the comments, and the things that I read every day are unreal. I mean, it's so bizarre, because you can imagine I went from this like fancy hosting parties twice a year at my beautiful loft in downtown Denver to adios, writing on social media and trying to figure out who I am. And so many of my relationships have changed because of that. But I've never felt more connected to people than these survivors who I don't know, who are all over the world and leave these comments about their stories. But I identify, and it pulls me in. It's really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, you have 110,000 followers on Instagram. And that's so
Yeah.
funny. You took a 4-month break. You're like, I don't even know if I want this.
Yeah.
And I do think that what you're saying is very true. The more people that you have, and especially if you do something, so the DMs, and just being really clear about your internal boundaries, not to talk about boundaries, but I have to, of what can I actually do and to be my best self and to bring what I can do. And so tell us a little bit about about the course and the opportunities that if you're listening, if this is interesting to you, if you follow Nate, you probably do, that this is an offering and it's kind of unique. It's really your first sort of big community style offering. So just tell us a little bit about when does it start? What's it called?
Thank you. Yeah, the number one request has been more information on inner child work and some sort of online community. And so I'm working on these different tools. And so I hired this company in Washington who's done an unbelievable job putting together all the tools that I've requested. It is an online course, but the videos are 15 to 20 minutes long. I just felt like with COVID and quarantine, now is not the time for me to do like a 6-week course with an hour-long video every week. And so I thought, how do I put this together in a way that people feel like I got everything that I needed? So we started studying, figuring out how much do courses cost. And the other thing that I'm really passionate about is recognizing I have been really fortunate to have the trauma-informed therapy that I have. So the way that this is set up, we did the course price of $98. And
Amazing.
yeah, but we hope that someone will pay $196 and sponsor someone else who cannot afford to take the course, because there are so many people that are getting as much as they can from social media, and that is their only outlet for any type of trauma-informed care. So that's the first piece. The second piece is twice a week at kind of odd hours. We're doing Tuesday at 9 a.m. and Thursday at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I'm doing live Q&As for 90 minutes where people call in from all over the world and they share their story, and I coach them directly one-on-one around what they learned in that week's module. There's also going to be a search option where you can enter your zip code and find the person nearest to you who's taken the course as well, to hopefully start building community with other survivors where you just feel safe. I can relate to the loneliness and isolation that is cycle breaking trauma work.
Yeah.
It's intense and it's really painful. And that's kind of my vision and hope. And then once the course is over, we'll be taking a portion of those profits and donating them to 2 different nonprofits that provide therapy at little to no cost, trauma therapy at little to no cost. So I'll be announcing that at the end of August. So I'm just trying to put a different model together that shows a lot of respect and awareness around the fact that a lot of people who need trauma-informed care the most don't have access to it. So how do we bring that awareness to them and then also support the other communities who are offering that informed care by sacrificing their time? And I want to support those causes.
Excellent. So you guys listening, I'm going to have all the information of how you can join Nate and his crew if it sounds like it's right for you. All that information is going to be there. I want to ask you, I have to ask the final question of the interview is going to be about boundaries, because it always is. But where can people find you?
The easiest, if you go to natewrites.com, that has access to my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram.
So like NATEWRITES, natewrites.com.
Yeah, like as a writer. And then all of my social media is there. My Instagram is Nate_Postlethwait, but my last name's so complicated that it's just easier to say, go to the website and it'll direct you everywhere.
Perfect. I love it. Okay, so here's my question about boundaries. Personally, and I might, I can guess this now that I heard your story. What has been your most challenging boundary struggle and how did you overcome it?
Such a good question. I overextended myself from a place of insecurity and low self-esteem in every area of my life. So with work, I have all of these clients who felt, wow, he did an unbelievable job. Well, yeah, because I had zero boundaries. I gave you access to me at all times. In relationships, there was no 50-50. It was okay if it was 90-10. I would be drawn to people who were going to take advantage of me. I was in constant sales mode of trying to convince other people of my worth and never turning it back on myself and questioning at what point will you be okay with yourself. So I would say overextending myself my whole life. And then that travel sabbatical a few years ago, I just got to a place in my life where I looked and said, if it's not 50-50, I'm not participating unless there's a very special calling. But if it's someone I've contributed quite a bit of my old 90-10 pattern, then we need at least 80-20 where they're carrying 80 and I'm doing 20. And that's it for a little while until we can balance out. And then I'll contribute back to 50-50. But for now, like on new relationships, if it's not 50-50, I'm not participating.
I love it so much. That is such a good answer. Thank you so much, Nate, for spending time with us today. I really appreciate you, what you're doing, that you now have this offering. It's just so amazing. So just thank you for being you and putting all of this out into the world. You are helping so many people who need it. And I just appreciate you. So thank you for being with me today.
Oh, thank you, Terri. It's been a pleasure.